Welcome to this Filmfest DC Q&A with Tracey Deer, director and co-writer of Beans, being recorded on May 26, 2021. I'm Linda Blackaby, senior programmer for the festival and curator of the Justice Matters section in which Beans is competing. We want to thank the Cross Currents Foundation for their support. I'm based in what's now known as San Francisco and acknowledge this location on the unceded territories of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who, along with hundreds of native tribes, have resided in California for thousands of years, particularly the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who continue to call the Bay Area home. Today, one of the largest urban First Nations populations is in the United States today, is very present here. Tracey Deer, the Mohawk director of Beans, began her film career in documentary in 2004, I think. She worked in various capacities on feature docs as well as documentary series for TV and got into fiction as co-showrunner of the critically acclaimed dramedy Mohawk Girls. Before Beans, she was a writing co-exec producer on season 3 of the Netflix CBC series Anne with an E. Tracey's received so many awards and accolades for a body of film and television work that I'm not going to list them really. You have to look her up. She does chair the board of directors of Women in View, a nonprofit that promotes greater diversity and gender parity in Canadian media. She's mentored emerging talent as a leader of the director training program at the Imaginative Film and Video Arts Festival, as a guest at the National Screen Institute's new Indigenous Voices programs, and as a mentor at NSI's new IndigiDocs training course. I love that term. Beans, Tracey's narrative feature debut, world premiere last fall virtually at the Toronto International Film Festival, where Tracey was honored with TIFF's Emerging Talent Award, presented to her by Ava DuVernay and chosen as one of Friday's 10 screenwriters to watch. So it's my honor and pleasure, Tracey, to talk with you today. And thanks for coming to Filmfest DC, albeit virtually. Where are you now in real life?
So I'm home, and that is located just outside of Montreal, Quebec, on the traditional unceded territory of my people, the Mohawk, the Tekahentahkhwa.
Okay. Well, welcome to our virtual screen.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask first, when did you decide you wanted to be a filmmaker? It's a terrible choice to make. And when did you decide to make this film?
The answer is the same for both, actually. I was 12. I was 12 years old when I got hit with a thunderbolt, when I realized just how cool that would be if I could tell stories and possibly, inspire viewers who are watching to feel and think all the different things that I was feeling at the time. Like, watching films was a safe space for me. It was a safe space to feel, and it was a safe space to grow. And I also lived through the Oka Crisis, which is the backdrop of the film Beans. I lived through that when I was 12 years old. So as a 12-year-old already having these big dreams of one day becoming a film director, it was the ultimate passion project. I said it way back then that one day this is the film I want to make, and I want to tell it in the way that I experienced that summer.
Okay. I saw the film initially at Toronto and again last night, and so I was really struck once again by how indelible the characters are. How kind of original they are, the pithiness of some of the lines, what they said, and the construction of the scenes. So I'd like to know what it's like to work with a co-writer on this and how you work together.
Yeah, so it took a really long time to get the script where we wanted it to be. And our process changed throughout the years. It adjusted accordingly. The whole process did begin with just me, and I, puttered along for about 2 years, coming up with the story structure and the outline. I had a lot of internal resistance revisiting those memories, and I felt a lot of self-applied pressure, and that pressure scared me. So there was a lot of avoidance, of this project. And at one point, my producer did say, Tracey, how can I support you? And at that point, I was working on Mohawk Girls with my co-show running partner. I really loved the collaborative aspect of television.
Yeah.
And I said, can we get a story editor on board just so I have somebody to react to my ideas? So that's when Meredith Vashnik joined me as my story editor. And she was just incredible support. And also it was an emotional support, to be with me through that. After a good year of that process, we were ready to go to draft. And at that point, Meredith had poured so much of herself into the process, and her whole heart was in it with me. And I could think of nothing better than doing it together. So I asked her if she wanted to come on board as a co-writer. And then that part of the relationship took off. Initially, what we did with the outline is we sort of divided up the scenes, and there were scenes that she would write. There were scenes that I would write. There were some scenes that are very, very personal and very much pulled from my own memory. So those I definitely, wanted to write myself. And then as we would write scenes, we would piece it together like a puzzle and just, put it all together. And then it was we needed to see how did it all flow together. And the most amazing thing happened. We were very similar writers. So once we pieced it all together, it actually flowed quite well. And you couldn't quite tell where one writer started and where one writer stopped. So that was very cool. And then later on in the process, we would tackle full drafts ourselves. So at one point, Meredith took the entire draft. We talked about what we wanted changed and what we thought it needed. And she took it and did her pass at it. And then from that draft, we talked about it again. And then it came back to me and I tackled it. So we had many different ways of working on it. And it went on for years until we finally hit upon what you see on screen.
While the Oka crisis is very well known in Canada, probably not so much in the United States, even though, it's happening here too. It's complicated, but can you just tell us a little bit about it, and how you worked it into the film? I mean, I looked at Elena's Obasawan's Tekahentahkhwa. Tekahentahkhwa, yeah, 270 years of resistance and whiskey, rocks at Whiskey Trench, and others. A straightforward documentary. You see how very complicated it is. So just a brief summary of it, and then talk about your approach to it, to telling that story of racism and the horror of growing up in that kind of environment.
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, in a very tight nutshell, the Oka Crisis was a land dispute that turned into an armed confrontation between my community, Mohawk community, and our neighboring Mohawk community of Tekahentahkhwa. The town right next door to this Mohawk community wanted to expand their golf course onto a sacred burial ground and an ancient forest that belonged to the Mohawk people. And this had been happening for centuries. Our land has just been slowly chipped away from us for centuries. And so that summer, 1990, that community said enough. And they occupied that forest, a peaceful occupation, so that it could not be bulldozed. And after about 4 to 5 months, the provincial police were called in, and they raided that peaceful protest armed. And that is what kicked off a 78-day armed standoff between our two communities. My community closed a provincial bridge that connected the South Shore with Montreal, closed that in solidarity of our brothers and sisters in Tekahentahkhwa. And that's the groundwork that's the beginning. And then there was so much that happened that summer before a resolution could be found. Mm-hmm. And then your second part of your question is how to take, and you're right, it is massive and it is complicated. And the earlier drafts really struggled with that because I was trying to explain all the little nuances of what was going on with the Oka Crisis in the movie, while also telling a coming of age story, and it was not working. My big aha was when I always continued to reconnect to the 12-year-old inside me and remember what it was like. And the truth of it was that at the time, I really didn't know what was going on. I didn't know a lot. And once I zeroed in on that as the authentic truth of that little girl's experience, it became a lot easier, because when we are with her narrative, we are experiencing what she's experiencing. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's confusing, sometimes we're not sure what just happened. But that is exactly how I experienced it, and how children experience these types of events. You know, they're not privy to everything that the adults are privy to. That said, I knew the audience did need some context in order for them as a viewer to understand what was going on. The last thing, I want them to be confused with her emotionally, but I don't want them to be so confused that they're not following what the story is. And that is why there are 4 pillars of archival moments in the film, which I used to deliver the pieces that I felt you needed to fill out the world and understand what was going on. But by no means do I consider the film to be a story about the Oka Crisis. It's about a story of a little girl who happened to live through the Oka Crisis. So those who want to know more, as you said, there's some incredible documentaries out there. There's books. I've read them all. You know, there's retrospectives. So there's a lot more information out there if interest is piqued through my film to learn more about the Oka Crisis.
So your vessel of coming of age, of course, is another young woman, really, almost. So how did you find your wonderful lead? And then I have another question about how you worked with the kids in some of these very dark scenes.
Yes. So we did an open casting call across Canada to find all the kids. We had kids videotaping themselves in their bedrooms and sending in their tapes. We shortlisted down to 5 kids per role, and we ended up flying them all into Toronto for a 2-day acting workshop so they could learn more about acting. You know, these were all just kids who were interested. They weren't experienced actors. Our acting coach was there, and it was acting 101. So it wasn't very specific to the film. It was all about acting. And I was there and I watched them grow over those 2 days. I watched to see what kind of vulnerability they were willing to share with this group of kids. And then at the end of that, we ended up doing another round of auditions. But because I had all of these kids there, I was able to pair them up in pairings that I was interested to watch chemistry. You know, I needed a brother and a sister, and I needed sisters. And as a sister myself, you know, that chemistry with your sister or with your brother, it's very specific. So you may be a very, very strong actor or actress, but paired up, getting that flow with your pretend brother sister is just as important. So after that, we had found 3 of them, and I continued to look for the youngest role. And just before we started shooting, she revealed herself to me. She's from my community, and it was somebody on my crew from my community who knew of her and just mentioned to me that, by the way, I don't know if you're still looking, but I know the perfect girl for this. And I ended up calling her mother. I cold called her mother and said, so this is who I am, and I'm making a movie, and I hear your daughter likes to act. Would you audition? They came in the very next day. She blew me away. And the very next day she was in like her wardrobe fitting. So it all happened very fast for her. 1 minute she was playing video games, and the next minute she was starring in a movie. And then, your second question is how did I work with them, especially for these very darker scenes. So the safety of especially my young actors, but all of us, you know, we were embarking on something very difficult, and I did not believe that like the ends justifies the means. You know, we needed to do that. We needed to do this in a way that we had a good time, our hearts were full, and we were safe. Otherwise, it's not worth it. You know, I am somebody who was traumatized by these events, and it profoundly affected me, affected my self-worth, affected my sense of safety. And safety is one of the biggest values I have. So I was not interested in re-traumatizing or traumatizing the first time for their first time in order to make this film. So it was my big challenge of how do I do this in that way. And I had incredible partners as we brainstormed and figured out how to do this. Many of the very dark scenes, the kids are actually very much removed from the ugliness. Their shots are isolated. So when you see the little girls crying out for their mother and looking around scared, they actually never saw the other part of that scene. That is how talented they are. You know, I told them what I needed emotionally, and I told them, this is what's happening. And they brought that performance. I mean, that is acting. And that was the case for much of it. So for the scene with the rocks being thrown, you know, the girls are low in the car. So at no point did those young actors hear all of the angry racist protesters. They didn't hear racial slurs. They didn't even have to have, we had fake rocks, of course. They didn't even have to throw the rocks, but the two kids, the two girls, asked if they could throw. They were like potatoes, is what we called them. They hit the car with like a thud. They asked, they said, can they throw it? Just so I have something to react to. And I said, okay, sure, they can if you want. And so they did. And you know, every time I was working with these extras who had to come in and really go to these ugly places, I spoke with them at the beginning of every day and told them, gave them permission really to go to those places for the sake of the film, for us to do something important with the film. But as soon as I yell cut, it was important to me that they come right back to themselves and who they know themselves to be, and bring as much positive energy to that set as possible. And they did. Every single one of those scenes, we were all having a great time, and they were all so supportive of the kids. And it really is a night and day thing, because you see the footage in the film and it's very awful. All those same people have the biggest hearts, and we're so proud to be a part of bringing this story to the screen. One last thing I'll add is that we also worked with body doubles. So there is a scene of sexual violence at the end of the movie. The two kids never did that part of the scene with each other. They had a body double stand in, and they were adult actors who were the body doubles. So each child worked with an adult. And in the case of Gawendio, my star, the body double for Hank was also actually a woman. So all of that difficulty, you know, she was doing with an adult woman, and they had multiple rehearsals. We had an intimacy coordinator with us who worked every single piece out with them. And I don't think you can tell. I think we pull it off in the film. You cannot tell that they're not actually doing this with each other. So one last thing I'll add, we had an elder with us on the day that we were in the Pines when we were recreating that initial invasion that happened. That elder had actually been there on the day. And so not only did he do an opening for us, but he also shared his feelings and observations about that day and where we are now 30 years later. And I think it set us off on the right path for that day. And on the big day with the rocks, we also had 3 Indigenous social workers with us. We had a PTSD specialist with us. So wherever and every idea that I could come up with to foster that sense of safety and trust is what we did.
It's interesting that Barry Jenkins, talking about his new series, talked about doing the same thing to avoid the re-traumatizing people about the horrors of slavery, and his cast and crew. So it's becoming much more people, filmmakers, much more conscious of this now, I think, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yes.
The hatred though that you see in the documentary or news footage is quite scary.
Yeah.
I mean that we see again today. So you get that in too. Yeah.
Yep. And it was very deliberate because the one thing I didn't want is for people to watch the film, see these ugly scenes, these fictionalized ugly scenes, and think, oh, that didn't happen. Oh, I'm sure she's exaggerating. I didn't want people to dismiss the hatred and dismiss the violence because it would make them feel more comfortable. Like it's a very natural thing because you don't want to believe that we are capable of that. So the archival footage for me was essential to make sure people understood that I am not exaggerating. In fact, at some points, I'm being very reasonable in what I am showing because look at what really happened. So yeah.
It's really a very smart movie.
Thank you.
One of the things in the script and all of that I found interesting, I could track when I saw it the second time instead of just experiencing it, was the way that violence goes around, the cycle
Yes.
of violence, in not only in society but within the family and how that was dealt with, and then the way that people deal with that trauma. Now, do you feel as though you've dealt with it making the film, sort of?
Definitely. Making the film and getting it out there has been incredibly cathartic, very healing. I have been on a healing journey for many years, and and that has been necessary for me to be strong enough and grounded enough to have made this movie. And so, yes, it has been an incredible journey. And, also for that little girl who lived through it, who then had this big, crazy dream to be a filmmaker. It's just all very full circle. And I'm so proud. I'm so proud of that little girl. I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of my people, the resilience, the strength, and that's where I come from. And I want the film to hopefully shake people awake and to gain allies for us, because we need allies, we need friends. That is how things are going to change. But I also want to celebrate how incredible my people are, and that's what the film is for me. And
it's really about that.
Yeah.
I watched one of the discussion you were having with Sebastian Martin at the Berlinale, and he had an interesting question at the end, which was that the concept of indigenous sovereignty in the political sense being an important part of the film's story, but also the narrative sovereignty in the film's representation of the journey of the main character, who at the end is proudly asserting her name and her place in the world, and telling her own story. But so I don't know if your thoughts about that have changed, but I'd like to hear them again for our audience.
Sure. I mean, I don't remember exactly what I said there, but I on this topic, it is imperative now that others step aside and let us tell our stories. We know best what it is to be Indigenous, and the layers that we bring to storytelling. I don't know that you can do the research to get to those layers. This is something that is very innate and is in all of us. And we're here, and we have things to say. And so we really do need people to step back from telling our stories. In a couple decades, once we've really had a good run at it, maybe consider it again. But we're here now, and it's time to let us tell you who we are.
Yeah, I think your film shows the value of that in like a really very moving way. It's like, what would you say now to a Indigenous 12-year-old girl or girls who has a dream of making films?
Go for it, girl. It is possible because I am right here. I have done it. I know it's possible. There's many of us who are paving that road, and we are there to help you on your way up. So I was told it was a crazy dream, and I'm here to tell you it is not. It is absolutely possible. Follow your passion, follow your dream, and don't let anybody put out that fire.
And then, well, let's see. Is there anything that I haven't asked you before I ask the last question that you would like to talk about, or point you would like to make, or story that?
I've really, really enjoyed all of your questions. You've hit upon a lot of the things that I feel are really important that I like to talk about. So I think I'm good.
Okay.
I'm interested to see what your last question will be.
Oh, I just want to know how you envision how you're going to create your future as an artist and a filmmaker going forward with Beans. After, I hope it shows a lot in the United States too, and all over.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, so Beans has really opened up so many doors, and I'm meeting a lot of people. I'm talking to a lot of people. There are a lot of projects sort of on my plate for me to consider. Good. So yeah, it's really exciting, and I think you'll be seeing more from me very soon.
I certainly hope so. I hope that comes. And thank you very much for spending some time with us and for your film.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and my film.